На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. Russia finally got underway with a nice victory against Finland in the second Euro 2020 match. And that was actually the first win in the Euros in general since June 2012 in a 4-1 of the Czech Republic. To discuss all that and more, we've got the usual guests, David Sanson.
Evening, James.
And we're also joined this week by a pair of guests, both from the Finnish Football Show Podcast. First of all, we've got Mark.
Hello.
And Rich.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I said to yourselves in our little chat we made for the pod that it was a little bit unlucky for the Finns, and it was a real tight game. And to be honest, before the game, I'd even said that I was really quite pessimistic after it's Belgium. It's one of the best teams in the world, number one ranked. But as we mentioned in the last pod, the nature of the errors and the more so the lineup and formation that Stani Cherchesov played really left me quite pessimistic for this one. But David, it's weird how quickly pessimism turned into optimism with potentially Stani's best team that he's picked.
Yeah, it was certainly an inspiring lineup when we saw it before kickoff. Obviously, he dropped the players who made the mistakes against Belgium. When I wasn't on last week, but in general, Russia, I think, were terrible bar those mistakes. They didn't concede huge amounts of possession and had some attacks, but dropping those two players, Semyonov and the goalkeeper Shunin, and replacing them with two of the youngest guys in the squad, Safonov and Diveyev. That was definitely promising, and to see a lineup which included both Golovin and Miranchuk, was a shock, really. It was hard to see what the lineup was going to be, whether it's going to be a 4 or a 3 at the back. Obviously, ended up with a 3 with Baranov dropping in to play alongside Diveyev and Jikia. But that team was pretty much from the squad who are selected and available. You would say that's 99% the best team that Stanislav Cherchesov could pick. The only player you might try and squeeze in place is maybe Cheryshev, but that would be really shoehorning to get him in there. And ideally, you'd probably want a better and a natural left wing back instead of Kuzayev. But saying that, Kuzayev had a very good game, so yeah, it gave us a lot of optimism going into the game, certainly.
Yeah, I think Cheryshev would have probably been a mistake. I've seen quite a few online. Some of the guys at Register mentioned that Cheryshev could potentially have came in at left wing back because of obviously the lack of options there. It's either him, Kuzayev, or Karavayev, because of his crossing ability and how much you would expect Russia to be on the front foot. But I think that's really what their opinion, without disrespecting them, is quite actually disrespectful of Finland, especially after the result performance last week. Their goal was a cross in, an excellent, brilliant cross, and then within 3 minutes, it was almost the same again, and it was in behind that Russian left-hand side where they wanted Cheryshev to play. And just imagine if they did, imagine with freedom, Finland would have had down that right-hand side, because Cheryshev, to be frank, he's not only bad defensively, I don't think I've ever seen him actually defend in a Russia shirt in my life. But Mark, we'll jump back a little bit and maybe move away from the game for a little while. But what were Finland's expectations in the tournament? And I presume perhaps already exceeding them with that opening game victory?
Well, yeah, I think our expectations weren't exactly high. The one of the biggest things for us is that we've actually kind of made it to the tournament for the first time, in our competitive history as an independent nation to a major tournament. We actually just wanted to turn up, to give ourselves a good account, not get pummeled in every single game, and leave with a little bit of our heads held high. After the Denmark game, though, I think we all looked around and thought, well, out of all the games that we've got in this group, Russia is the team that's most beatable. And Russia's still a tough team.
Yeah.
They're still a big team, but compared to Denmark and against Belgium, we thought we could definitely have a go. And then when we saw both the highlights from the Russia-Belgium game, where the Russians, you guys looked a little bit off the pace, and then obviously the performance that we put in.
It's being a little bit tight.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it was a strange one, the Belgium game, because I mean, you did have, as you said, you had individual errors, but also the general play across 90 minutes wasn't exactly competitive. And then we put in a really good show against the Danes. I mean, obviously there was the whole situation there around Ericsson that sort of coloured the night's events, but with 3 points in the bag, you look at that and think, well, if we get a point here, in St. Petersburg, that'll be us, halfway done. It'll take the pressure off for the last game. So going into the game, we actually thought, well, we've been playing well. Russia seemed to be a little bit struggling. We've got a chance here to make hay. But as the teams were put out, I think I pinged you a bit before the match, and I was I had trepidation because I thought, oh no, they've gone back to that back three, the way that Cherchesov has been playing for the last, I don't know, year, 2 years. So that you guys obviously changed it up to play Belgium, and then you went back to the way that you knew how to play, and that worried us. And then as we announced our lineup, we didn't have a space for Tim Sparv, who'd done excellently well against Denmark, keeping the middle of the pitch safe and secure for us. So we had a little bit of trepidation just as the team sheets were put out.
And why was Sparv dropped, Rich? Was it? I mean, he's Finland's captain. I must admit, I did find that a little bit of a surprise. Is the squad, Finland squad in general? I think this is. I can imagine there's not many disappointments with the composition of the squad for the tournament, and when you compare it to Russia's, there's actually more Finnish players in your composition, Rich, that actually play in the top 5 leagues than we do have in Russia's team.
Yeah, it was a strange one. I think that there was an element that Sparv had knee surgery at the end of March, and the Denmark game, he played 75 minutes. That was the longest he's played in his comeback from injury, and he's not played really any club football since January. And I think there was an element that they wanted someone a little bit more mobile, because Sparv's quality isn't his fitness or his movement. It's more about his reading of the game. So Rasmus Schuller, he's younger, he's able to get around the pitch a lot easier than Sparv. And to be honest, I think the threat, we talked about, it might have been Golovin, but just that needing that little bit more mobility in the centre of midfield, that was probably the reason, because as Sparv himself said after the game, it was a tactical reason as much as his fitness. But I mean, for him, I mean, he's 34 and a half now, and I think that there was an element that he'd struggled to play 3 full matches in 8-9 days, so there was always a likelihood that he wouldn't start one of the matches. So that was the main reason. And I mean, I think what we lacked was his experience and his influence on the rest of the team. Yeah,
certainly. I think naive is maybe a little bit harsh to say, but early on it was almost that because of the early disallowed goal, the VAR that I'll get onto in a minute, it seemed like that maybe drew Finland out a little bit, and especially after the goal, that did draw Finland out somewhat more, as you would expect, because they needed the point. But there was that little phase there when Russia really kind of exerted a little bit of control, and it wasn't particularly any quality. The only quality from both sides, the real star quality from both sides, was the Miranchuk goal. But that was perhaps where Sparv would have been useful with his experience and his leadership, just to keep a little bit of a calmer head in the middle of the park. But I did allude to it there, David, and the disallowed goal, but I think that was, fair to say, a massive let-off for Russia, while being, yes, slightly offside.
Oh yeah, big let-off. Finland just started off with the super high press. The 3 attackers, Poyan, Polo, Pukki, and I don't know who the third guy was, probably Lurd, all just sat there in front of the defence. Russia tried to play out. Deveyev tried to stick that ball low and wide, and the fullback pushed on and nabbed it in front of Kuzayev. And, fine margins. I think that shocked Russia. After the disallowal of the goal, that sort of shocked Russia into waking up. It's like, okay, we're in a game here. Finland aren't going to be, just sitting off us and allowing us to play out necessarily. They didn't keep that momentum and pressure up for the whole game. But that pressure that they were playing sort of did stick around in the early stages of the game. Boyambolo was finding lots of little pockets behind the striker, I thought, between the lines. The Russian midfield trio were all quite attack-minded, I want to say. They were sort of all pushing up a bit, even Zoblin, who was meant to be the deepest. Finland were definitely looking a threat. Diveev was the deepest of the three defenders, and a couple of times you thought Pukki was going to get in a wave behind him. He almost did, twice throughout the game. Diveev got back on both occasions and made excellent blocks. Finland were not here just to make up numbers, and they really, I think, shocked Russia into playing sort of a bit safer in those early stages, which sort of just set the game up for how it went.
I think this move back to the regular formation and introduction of the younger players, with Stani finally putting a little bit of faith in Diveev in defence, really is what won the match, to be honest. I think he only played the back four against Belgium, which was an absolute massive, unmitigated mistake because of the injury to Fyodor Kuznetsov, and he just didn't trust in Diveev to cover. He finally put that trust in him. He started a little bit shaky. I think I even live tweeted that there was a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde performance at first, but as the game wore on, he really grew into it. And interestingly, the formation, BBC originally had it as a 4-3-3, which it quite clearly wasn't. And then I think a lot of people expected 3-4-3 with Miranchuk and Golovin either side of Zuba. But in actuality, it was more of like a diamond in midfield, where Zoblin was the base, was Doriev and Golovin, and then Miranchuk directly behind Zuba. And obviously more from that, because Miranchuk, Doriev and Golovin just feed off to the wings. And I think 77% of all of Russia's build-up play was on the wings. It was about trying to get it out and take advantage of Zuba's aerial ability. And I read a stat today that Zuba's actually won 27 aerial duels so far in the tournament, which is 11 more than anybody else, including a lot of other teams who've already played twice. I think it was Lyndon Dykes was second with 16. To be fair, Scotland haven't played yet, so he'll probably pass him. But it just shows what Zuba brings to Russia. He's not scoring. He's actually his longest scoreless streak for the Russian national team now since 2015-16. And but what he is doing is he's really taking advantage of his frame, creating for others. He obviously got the assist on Miranchuk's goal, and he was just utterly dominant in the air throughout. I think at one point that he was just running into people left, right, and centre and heading everything. And Mark, I'm surprised that Zuba didn't come away with a yellow card. At least I thought one challenge on the Finnish defender where he kind of just took his eyes off the ball entirely and just clattered into him. I think he was a little bit lucky to get away with that one.
Yeah, I think by that time Russia's approach to game management, should we call it, had changed a lot in the second half. And when the ball came down, I think he only had eyes on Toivio, and then he just threw his entire weight through him. And you've got to feel for the defender, because that's Dubia. He's not one of those guys that you want to take a hit from. He is enormous. But it's a funny thing actually, because I've like before the tournament and in the build-up, I've heard a lot of what is he described as the Russian Zlatan, I think he's called, and that he's good with his feet for a big guy, and I'm sure he is. But I didn't get to see it against Belgium or against Finland. He was mainly
well off his game.
Yeah, and he was also used as the target. Like he was just it was just for a large part of the first half in particular, balls were being lumped into him rather than being sort of played in and around him.
Zuba's one of those guys where at club level he's not a guy who you're going to whack it in and he's going to be dominant scoring headers. The gameplay for club level and against Finland was get the ball into him and he's going to nod it down or chest it down, but typically he is actually very good with his feet. And I noted during the game that he was very off with some of these little flicks and touches, which he's normally quite proficient at. So well observed, because he was really not on it on that day.
It's ironic with Zuba, because Zuba's probably, by look and by reputation, one of the biggest and scariest sort of target men strikers you'll see. So you automatically think that it's going to be balls whipped into him to whack it in, but he's actually got more goals with his feet than he does with his head in the RPL because everything he does in terms of target man is back to goal, 30 yards out, and then it's running on, and he gets so many goals where he just ghosts off late, and I'm not sure sometimes if his ghosting is intentional, if it's just because he's really slow. But he's a bit of a weird one too, but we try and explain him because he is ignominy to everybody, to be honest. In Russia, even Zenit fans, some of them absolutely despise him because they think that he's brought the club into disrepute with some of his actions off the pitch and accepting the league trophy dressed as Deadpool. But if we swap from Russia's probably star man, to be fair, and the Finland star man, Rich, what did you think of Timo Pukki's performance? Because like I said before, but I thought he was some of those chances that Paul Hanpialo, and no disrespect to him because he scored an excellent goal in the first game and nearly had two, was getting on the end of. I just feel like Russia were a little bit lucky that some of those didn't quite fall to Pukki in the form he's been in the last year.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that we that was well noted in the Denmark game on Saturday, that Pukki's threat is now so obvious, and we've seen it in most teams that Finland have played over the last sort of 18 months, is that teams are now so shrewd around how they deal with him that's how Pohjanpalo gets his space. And the problem is that, again, yesterday, Pukki wasn't finding that space because he was well marshalled. The ball was coming to Pohjanpalo. Again, Pohjanpalo is better in the air, which is why the crossing was such an obvious threat from that third minute. But it's just difficult because Pukki, he's not fully fit as well. I mean, he had an ankle injury last month, which, I mean, he said he was fine, but it's just difficult. He's not really had much of a chance to show what he's really capable of. I mean, this is the Pukki of a couple of years ago where he's trying to feed others and he's being a bit more selfless because he has to be. And I mean, Pohjanpalo's a quality centre forward, but Pukki's in the form he's been for the last 3 or 4 years. He arguably would have been a bit more threatening. And when he was taken off, I imagine there was some fitness or injury concern, but the changes seem to really nullify Finland. And you kind of, when you take off Pukki, you're missing Sparv. The players that they had in reserve, Lapalainen, he's quick, but he's no Pukki. Marcus Forss, who's been scoring goals for Brentford, he didn't get off the bench. And it's just a shame that was kind of how it ended, really. There was a lot of running around and there wasn't really any direct threat and there wasn't any real opening. That, you know, Pukki on form only needs half a chance, but to be honest, across 2 games, he's not really even had that.
Yeah, he hasn't really had much of a look in. Mark, would you want Finland to try and open up a little bit more, especially not against Belgium? Against Belgium, it'll be more the same, but in the Russia game, obviously, when they went 1 down, would you want them to try and open up a little bit, or is it best off sticking to what they know?
Well, we struggle. You know, we're built for, particularly in this sort of version of Canaver's side, we play 5 at the back or 3 at the back, sorry, and wing backs, but we're built to counter attack quickly. And in the second half, when Russia sort of sat off, it caused a really big problem because what you could see and what we could see is that there wasn't a great deal of movement up top. And as you guys sat back, we just sort of struggled we passed the ball around at the back. We tried to draw Russia out. But when you guys didn't take the bait, we ended up invariably punting long diagonals. And, you know, they can come off every now and again, but it's not an effective route forward. Should we have been more direct, kept it more on the floor? I think we could have done, but it's not really our strength.
Yeah, certainly. But when Palo I've watched a little bit of him in the Bundesliga over this last year when we were in Berlin, and I was watching him then and in the Euros as well. I'm really surprised by his aerial prowess, considering he's not the biggest striker, and he reminds me a bit of Tim Cahill in the sense that it's more so how he uses his ability and his positioning that really gets him those chances. Which do you think? It's
one of these where I think when he burst onto the scene about 9 years ago, he was almost seen as this complete striker. His relationship with Pukki generally works quite well, and the fact that Lod has played as well has been a bit more attacking than a lot of us saw coming really. But the link up play between the two has been difficult. Again, we're talking realistically where we're playing two stronger teams away from home, and they're not getting the chances to link together. But I mean, Palo getting his head on the ball in both games yesterday didn't really work out, but it's something we knew he was capable of. But it's just difficult that sometimes he's had so many injuries as well. It's a common thing now. So many injuries that he's not quite the player everyone thought he would be, and he's really trying to find his new identity, much in the way that Pookie did. He had to go away and almost reinvent himself. I mean, there's still hope for him yet, but it'd be difficult against Belgium on Monday.
Yeah, certainly. It seems like it's going to be very much backs against the wall, and to be honest, hopefully he could do a better job of that than Russia's pretty terrible attempt of backs against the wall defending in the opening game. But David, if we do move from Russia's defence and their attack, in that Belgium game, Russia's XG was actually 0.26, and that's the second lowest out of the entirety of the top first round games of the tournament. Only Hungary's was lower in the match of Portugal of 0.18. Now, in the second game, in the Finland match, Alexander Golovin actually recorded the highest expected threat of XT score of any single player in any single game during Euro 2020. So, how impressed were you with Golovin and the Miranchuk sort of axis, or was there maybe some further deeper that really impressed you in the day?
I think Golovin just put in one of his standard, high energy performances. He was all over certainly the attacking half of the pitch. He was popping up on the left side quite a bit, linking up with Kuziaev, and when needs be, he was coming deep, coming across to the right. We know he can do that. In the first round of games, I think he had the most distance covered of any player in the tournament. That's just the kind of player he is. He just has an insanely good stamina. And I thought, he wasn't necessarily he wasn't the creative spark. He was obviously involved in a lot of the build-up to have that number so high. Miranchuk definitely looked like the guy who was going to make something happen. And obviously, we know he can do that. In tight spaces, we've seen it over the years. He can just make something out of nothing, and he did just that. Obviously, with the goal. I thought those two were good. Kuzayev, down the left as a left wing back, I thought was really good. Constantly, making of all Russia's team, I think he made some of the best runs for the whole 90 minutes, getting him down the back of the Finland fullback. It's just a shame he's not a natural left footer, because there's a couple of times where those balls were probably perfect for him just to run on and just whack it in. But every time he obviously wanted to cut it back and get crosses in. Obviously, we had a couple of. I think Juba had one where it's just slightly too high. We had Mario Fernandez had a similar one where obviously then he hurt his back. So Kuzayev was really good. I thought he was Russia's best player on the day, certainly, and Jikia and Diveev, and to a degree Baranov. I was actually exclaiming, thinking Baranov needed subbing at half time, because I thought he was going to get a second yellow card at any instant, especially knowing he's a bit of a hothead. But fair play to him, he managed to avoid a yellow card, although he did have quite a hard tackle quite early in the second half, and I was thinking, Jesus man, he's going any second. But he managed to hold on, and the back three were solid, certainly indeed. And for Finland, I really thought Kamara he was excellent. I haven't seen him really at all since he gone to Rangers, but I thought he was fantastic against Russia.
That's a very David Sanson thing of knowing a lot about Glenn Kamara when he was at Dundee and Arsenal's kids, but not at all when he's been starting for Rangers. But on Kuziaev, I think I agree. I tweeted after the game my thoughts on the RFN the Twitter chant page, and Kuziaev, while I was a little bit torn on Kuziaev, because defensively Finland were aiming for the diags, for the free the flank quite often, trying to expose Baranov and Kuziaev in unfamiliar positions equally. I thought Urinen was quite good at exposing Baranov and trying to get him behind him. Then also note to Urinen for that brilliant goal-saving challenge on Vyacheslav Karavayev, where he got a boot to the head for the best of it as well. And it was a absolutely brilliant bit of brave and well read defending as well. But Kaziaev, I feel like it is because he's not a natural left wing back. A lot of the time when he got into those really good positions, his output was to kind of take the safer option, give it to Golovin, which is totally understandable considering the quality that he's got on the ball, and perhaps that's exactly what he was instructed to do by Stani. But sometimes it would have been a bit nicer if Kaziaev did take a little bit more of a risk and get the cross in himself, or try and get in behind the Finnish defence. But I think that's just purely down to the fact that he's alongside Alexander Golovin, and it's not his natural position. But aside from that, I was really impressed by his performance. I thought he was our best player on the day, as well as some really strong performances from Georges Gikier, who was an absolute rock for the second game in a row. He's been Russia's consistently best defender for well over a few years now. He's the one constant in defence in the team sheet, and always has been since the World Cup. I'm surprised he didn't go off, and I'm really surprised he hasn't picked up an injury. But if Russia want to do anything out of this tournament, he has to remain in the team and on the pitch, because I worry about the defensive depth beyond that. What did you think of Diveyev, David? Because I mentioned earlier myself that he looked a little bit shaky at the start, but I thought he really grew into the game. And I thought my favourite part of his performance was seeing his kind of traditional sort of move, what he does with Siska, where he's the one who steps up. He reads the play, and he'll intercept the ball and then move out with the ball and then open himself up for a pass. I thought it was really nice to see him do that for the first time for Russia.
My favourite part was when he went up for a header at a corner, and BBC, or whoever was showing the game, I can't remember, I think it was BBC, had a big close-up of his face, and he was sort of doing a Phil Jones style sort of facial expression. And but that was great. But yeah, I was I didn't really blame him for the early Finland chance, the Poyan Palo one, because Finland pressed so high and no one was giving him an option.
Mm.
And the pass out to Kuzai was maybe lacking in pace, but only a tiny bit. But Kuzai was not ready for it, or wasn't on his toes enough, and allowed the Finland fullback to come in. I didn't realise he was as slow as that. I always thought he was not terribly slow, but that Pukki on a couple of occasions was well away from him. But
yeah.
He recovered really well on both occasions, and it gave me. It was just nice to see a young Russian player do well at international level, and it sort of made you think maybe this guy can go and do it outside of Russia in the future.
Yeah, certainly. Mark, do you think that perhaps me anyways, being a bit harsh and putting the blame on Russia for that potential VAR goal? Because it was really kind of prototypical Finland and what one of the strengths is of your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we pounced well. We reacted well, and we usually do like to start games, relatively offensively, because we know for most games we'll spend a lot of the time behind the ball, trying to hit on the counter. So we usually try to take advantage of the first sort of 5 minutes. I wouldn't blame yourselves too much, but it was obviously, I think, a defensive lapse. So it's not a strong pass out wide, and then there's a Diveyev who's waiting for the ball. He's not aggressive enough when he goes to collect. He's actually just sort of sitting back, and he doesn't see Raitala coming. So I think there was a bit of a lapse there, and it was a bit of a let-off. But for Diveyev, he isn't. I mean, I don't think he's slow. But you've got to remember, Pukki's really quick over the first sort of 2-3 yards. He's got an absolutely manic turn of pace, and he did recover quite well. If I could compare him to a player, and try not to take this too harshly, I would say Diveyev. It reminds me a lot of a young Stephen Taylor. Now, if that's a bit obscure for many fans, but he was a former Newcastle defender who, when he was like 21, was the captain of England under 21s, and he looked amazing because he was strong, he was good in the air, he could read the game, and he was quick. As he got older, I think he was found out in terms of his positional sense and in terms of his technical ability. And Diveyev seems to have that, about him. He's got a lot of really good qualities. But I think sometimes he sort of missed the flight of the pass or lost his runner just for a second. So he looks good on the recovery, but he tends to be recovering from his own positional play.
Yeah, certainly. It was that was the case in the Belgium game as well. I think he was the one who was chasing Lukaku for the third goal. He was never ever going to catch Lukaku, no matter how fast he is. But in his initial threat, he was a little bit too far away positionally from Lukaku, from my point of view. I think that was one of Russia's biggest issues, is that they gave Lukaku in general throughout the entirety of the game just far too much space on the ball. And if you give him that sort of space, he will take you for that. And in terms of the Taylor comment, I'm not going to mention anything about Stephen Taylor, considering I am a Sunderland supporter. I think that's probably for the best. But Rich, in terms of Finland's next game against Belgium, what are your, not expectations, but maybe hopes for the rest of the tournament? Is it just try and get anything you can out of that and see if you can get through to the next stage?
There is an element of that. I mean, to be honest, it's having seen flashes of Belgium and the second half performance against Denmark, there will be a case of damage limitation. I think with Belgium having already got 6 points and through, who knows what they may do with their team. It would be nice to come out and see Finland look a little bit more attacking, or at least with that intent. I mean, it's a difficult mindset to change over the course of 5 days, but there has been, like yesterday, for example, in the midfield, there was huge gaps between Lord and Kamara and Schuller when he was on, that there just seemed a bit too much space there, and I think a little bit almost too much reliance on the wing backs for the width, and Urunen in particular has played quite well. But you just hope that they'll come out thinking, because I mean, Finland can't sit back, because if they sit back, they're just going to invite the world's best team onto them. But they need to show something. I mean, they've shown in the last couple of years, when they went to France and won, albeit it was almost like a B game, but even so, just some intent, just that actually go at them a little bit, have a bit of bravery. And I think we're in that awkward situation now where we need to keep an eye on results elsewhere. And I mean, if Finland come away with it with a horribly negative goal difference, that might impact on their progress in the group. But I think it'd be nice to see something where, like was said earlier, the disallowed goal yesterday did seem to show, that the heads did drop. And I think there was, again, that Mark mentioned the word game management. I think that was the word going around on the WhatsApp group. Having that little bit of experience and knowing when to slow the game down, when to draw a foul, things like that, just to take the sting out of the game. It's a skill that these players will hopefully learn in time, but you can see Russia have been at many, many tournaments, and that's something that they know, and hopefully they'll have learned something from it.
Yeah, certainly. I think playing Russia as well, Russia's game management's bizarre, because Russia's game management's not quite sometimes what you would expect in terms of exerting control over a game, sitting a little bit deeper, taking a little bit easier. Russia's game management is kind of like a microcosm of Zuba and what they did in 2018, where they shithoused their way to a quarterfinal. And it is very much Zuba pile driving headfirst into players. It's getting up in people's faces. It's playing very physical football around their few star players, of course. But Russia, when they get a lead like that, they get quite, or they go behind, it can be quite nasty, and it's sometimes not the easiest to play against. But David, what is your quick expectations as we finish off the pod for the last group game against Denmark, after, of course, Denmark themselves lost to Belgium after going a goal up?
I mean, while we were recording this, I was reading through a thread of permutations, and my word, it's like such a convoluted way. Like, if it's going to potentially, if Finland get a result against Belgium, it could go down to the goal. I think, literally down to goals scored or something ridiculous, or the individual results. So, but if Denmark come out like they did today, early, high intensity football against Russia won't like that at all.
No, not at all.
It's a weird one, because in theory Russia just need a draw. A draw would be enough for Russia to go through, as far as I'm aware, regardless of results elsewhere, I think.
But do I have faith that they'll sit back and keep it solid for 90 minutes? Probably not.
I mean, honestly, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to expect until literally the lineup's out. Probably it literally depends who, if Kudryashev's fit and Zhirkov's fit, and Stanny says he's going to play him again. we might as well just pack up now.
Yeah, just imagine the pace of that
And I'm an
Belgian
optimist.
victory in behind Kudryashov and Zhirkov. Yeah, I'll try to figure out some permutations as well, and even looking beyond, not just for Russia, but just like the cup tournament in general. And I think because of the introduction of those extra 8 into the Euro 2016, it's once again almost nigh on impossible to try and figure out who those extra 4 teams will be and who they're going to play and where teams are going to finish up. So for me, expectations is, Stanley, please don't revert back to your usual way of how you do things, and younger players continue performing the way they did, because I thought some of the younger lads, Defeyev still only 21, Maxim Mukin only 19, they in particular had some quite mature performances, especially late on. Mukin came on for Dostoyev. I think it was Dostoyev, wasn't it? And he just calmed the game down, and you could see he has maturity beyond his years. And I mean, David, we've said ourselves that we weren't sure if Mukin should be in the squad or whether it should have been Omiarov with his experience. But you can kind of see why what Stanley saw into him with his just calmness on the ball. And I think that's one thing that he really brings to the Lokomotiv midfield as well, considering who he has around him with Prokoviak and Kulikov or Makiev, whoever it is. They're quite live wires at times. So Mukin's calmness is a real asset. And later on, I was very impressed by his maturity. And unfortunately, due to some technical issues we had earlier, we have been delayed a little bit today. So we're going to have to finish a little bit early. So it's a little bit shorter than in the last pod. But we'll be back after the Denmark game to review all of that. And hopefully for Russia, that will not be the last pod of the tournament, because hopefully we'll be going into the knockout stages. But for now, anyway, that is the end of the RFN podcast. David, thanks for joining me.
No problem.
And Mark, thanks for joining us, and good luck for the next game.
Thanks very much. Good luck to yourselves.
And Rich,
Thank you for having us. It's good fun.
this has been the RFN podcast.
Летит над
Goodbye
полем
for now.
мяч. Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.